For 19 days, I lay in a hospital bed in Hamilton, and not one person from my own family came through that door. Not my daughter. Not my son-in-law. Not my sister Vera. 19 days. I want you to actually sit with that number for a moment. Because I've had months to sit with it, and it still doesn't fully make sense to me. That's 456 hours of IV drips and blood pressure cuffs and night nurses checking my vitals at 2 in the morning. 456 hours of staring at the acoustic tile ceiling and listening to the heating vent rattle and wondering. In the very quiet way you wonder things when you're too tired to be dramatic about it, whether anyone would notice if I simply stopped getting better. My name is Bette. I'm 53 years old. I've lived in Ontario my whole life. I raised my daughter, Noelle, mostly on my own after her father and I separated when she was 11. I worked 30 years as a licensed practical nurse at a long-term care facility, which means I have spent the better part of my adult life showing up for other people on the worst days of their lives. I mention that not because I want credit for it, but because it matters to the story. It matters in the particular painful way that irony always matters. This is the story of how I learned at 53, lying in a hospital bed with a PC line in my arm, exactly what I was worth to the people I loved most, and what I decided to do with that information. It started on a Saturday in February. I remember because I'd been planning to drive up to Barrie that morning to help my sister Vera sort through some furniture she wanted to sell. I never made it out of the house. I woke up feeling wrong in a way I couldn't name, like my body had made a decision without consulting me. By 9 o'clock I was on the kitchen floor and I couldn't get back up, and the only clear thought in my head was that I needed to call someone before I passed out completely. I called Noelle first. She didn't answer. I called twice more and got her voicemail both times, that cheerful recorded voice that sounded nothing like the daughter I'd raised. I texted her, 3 words, because 3 words was all I had left in me. Mom. Need help. Then I called 911. The paramedics told me. Later I'd had a cardiac event, which is a careful phrase that medical people use when they want to tell you something serious, without saying the word they know you're not ready to hear. There was surgery. There was a second procedure 2 days later, when the first one didn't hold the way they'd hoped. There was a week in the cardiac care unit and then a transfer to a general ward and then, slowly, a long slow nothing, which is what recovery mostly feels like when you're on the other side of 50. And your body is recalibrating everything it thought it knew about itself. Noelle texted back 4 hours after I'd sent those 3 words. She wrote, "Oh no, Mom. Which hospital? Hope you're okay. Miles and I are in the middle of something right now, but I'll check in later." In the middle of something. My daughter was in the middle of something. I want to be precise here because I think precision matters. I don't want to tell you this story the way we sometimes tell stories about people who have hurt us, making them flatter and easier to condemn. Noelle is not a bad person. She never has been. She's 31 years old and she has a good job in Mississauga, doing something with digital marketing that I've never fully understood. And she married Miles 3 years ago in a lovely outdoor ceremony, at a vineyard near Niagara-on-the-Lake that I helped pay for. She is not cruel. She's just the kind of person who can look at a situation and not quite see what it requires of her. She called me the evening of day 2 after the second procedure. I was still in the cardiac care unit and the nurse had to hold the phone for me because my hands weren't cooperating. Noelle asked how I was feeling. I told her it was serious, that there had been a complication, that the doctors were monitoring things closely. She said, "That sounds really scary, Mom. You're strong though, you'll get through it." And then she asked if I'd been able to reach our family friend Petra, as if Petra were the appropriate person to manage this situation. As if the natural next step was to hand me off to someone else. I didn't hear from Miles at all during the first week. Not a text, not a voicemail, nothing. I had been careful to include him as family, had bought him birthday gifts every year, had driven to Mississauga in February to attend his office holiday party. When Noelle said it would mean a lot to him, he had my number. He simply didn't use it. My sister Vera called on day 3. She sounded worried, genuinely worried, which made me feel something loosen a little inside my chest that wasn't related to the cardiac muscle. But Vera lives in Barrie, which is a 90-minute drive on a good day, and she has a bad hip, and I told her not to make the trip in winter weather. She asked if Noelle was with me. When I told her no, She went quiet in a way that told me. She understood something she didn't want to say out loud. I had a physiotherapist named Gus who came by every weekday afternoon to walk me up and down the hall. Gus was 26 years old and had one of those permanently cheerful dispositions that should have been annoying but somehow wasn't. He was the person I talked to most during those 19 days. He knew my daughter's name. He knew I'd been a nurse. He knew I preferred the chair by the window to the one near the door because I could see a strip of sky if I angled it right. He knew I liked my tea without milk. He learned all of this because he asked, which sounds like a small thing, but in those 3 weeks felt like the largest thing in the world. The woman in the bed next to mine, separated by a curtain, had her husband there every single afternoon from 2 o'clock until visiting hours ended at 8. He brought her Tim Hortons in a travel mug from home. Her own mug that she preferred. Because he said the hospital cups made the coffee taste like plastic. Her adult children came on weekends in rotating shifts, so she was never alone for long. I'd pull my curtain partway and listen to the sound of their voices the way you listen to a television in the next room when you can't sleep. Not making out words, just the sound of people being present for someone they loved. I had Gus and a student nurse named Amara who always made sure my blanket was tucked in properly, and a very small window with a view of a parking garage. By the end of the second week, something shifted in me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one moment of clarity so much as a gradual settling, like sediment falling to the bottom of a glass. The grief of being alone was still there, but underneath it, something harder was forming. A kind of quiet resolve I hadn't felt in years. I was discharged on a Thursday, the 19th day. Noelle did not come to take me home. She texted that morning to say Miles had a work thing and she couldn't get away, but that she'd ordered me a grocery delivery for the weekend. I took a cab home, which cost $42, because taxis in Hamilton still run on meters, and the fare from the hospital to my house took 20 minutes in afternoon traffic. I gave the driver a $10 tip, because he helped carry my bag to the door without being asked, and I wanted to acknowledge what it meant when someone simply did the thing that needed doing. My house had been empty for 19 days. The plants on the kitchen windowsill had died. The pothos and the little succulent Noelle had given me the previous Mother's Day. The mail had drifted through the slot into a pile behind the door. There was a smell, that particular closed-up smell of a place that hasn't had any air moved through it in weeks. I stood in the kitchen for a long time before I sat down. I sat on the kitchen floor actually, not because I couldn't make it to a chair, but because the chair at the table felt like it required a kind of uprightness I wasn't ready for. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets, the way I used to sit when Noelle was small since she'd had a bad day and needed to be close to the ground for a while. And I let myself understand, very clearly and without drama, what had just happened. No one had come. Not because they didn't know, not because they couldn't get there. Because they had looked at the situation and decided, in whatever quiet way we decide these things, that it wasn't necessary, that I would manage, that I always managed. I made myself promise sitting on that kitchen floor. I promised that I would stop managing things so efficiently that no one ever felt the need to show up. I promised myself I would stop treating my own needs as an inconvenience, and I promised that the next time someone in my family needed something from me, I was going to let the answer come from that floor, from that kitchen, from those 19 days, and not from the part of me that had been saying yes for 30 years, out of love and habit, and the fear of being thought difficult. I didn't have to wait long, 23 days after I came home, which I know precisely because I'd been counting everything since I left the hospital. Tracking days the way you track things when you're keeping evidence for a conversation you know is coming. My phone rang on a Sunday evening. It was Noelle. She sounded warm, almost buoyant, which was the first signal that something was being asked me. She told me she and Miles had found a house. A detached in Oakville, 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard. She said it was perfect and that they'd been watching the market for a year. And this was the right time. The interest rates were finally coming down a little, and they had the pre-approval, but they were short on the down payment. They needed $22,000 to close the gap. Could I help? It was an investment, she said, in their future. Family helps family. I held the phone and I didn't say anything for a moment. I want to tell you what was happening inside me during that silence, because it wasn't simple. Part of me still loved her. That part doesn't just stop. Part of me wanted to say yes the way I'd said yes my whole life, because saying yes to Noelle had always been the thing that made me feel like a good mother, like someone who showed up. But there was another part now, a newer and quieter and somehow steadier part, that was sitting on a kitchen floor in Hamilton looking at dead plants and $42 worth of cab fare and 19 empty days. And that part of me simply waited. I said, let me think about it. And I got off the phone. I sat with it for 2 days. I want you to understand that this was not impulsive. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I did not want to perform anything. I just wanted to respond honestly, which takes longer than people think. On the Tuesday I opened my online banking. I transferred $220 to Noelle's account, which is exactly $22,000 divided by 100, which is $1 for every $1,000 she'd asked for. In the e-transfer note, I wrote, for the down payment. That's my contribution. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and went to make tea. The reaction was not immediate. It came in waves over the following 48 hours. Noelle called that evening and I let it go to voicemail. She called again the next morning. When I finally answered, on the third call, she sounded confused more than angry, which told me she hadn't yet worked out what the number meant. Mom, I think there's been a mistake. The transfer was $220. No, I said. Silence. That's not. I mean, we needed $22,000. I know what you needed, I said. Mom, what is this? And here is where I had made myself a decision beforehand, because I knew myself well enough to know that if I went into that conversation without a plan, I would soften and apologize and make it easier for everyone except myself. So I had written down, on an actual piece of paper, what I needed to say. Not because I'm theatrical, but because I always process things better when she writes them down first. I said, I was in the hospital for 19 days in February, Noelle. I had 2 procedures. For 19 days no one from this family came, not you, not Miles, not once. I came home in a cab. My plants were dead. And in the 23 days since I got home, the first real conversation you've initiated with me is to ask for $22,000 to buy a house. So I sent you what I had to give, which is $1 for every $1,000 you ask for, and that number is my answer. Another silence. Longer. That's not fair, Mom. We had things going on. You know how much is on our plate right now. Things going on, I repeated. For 19 days, both of you. You always do this. You make everything into a thing. I make everything into a thing, I said. Okay. I said goodbye and I hung up. It felt less like anger and more like setting something very heavy down on the ground. Over the next 3 days, Miles twice. I want to emphasize this. Miles, who had not called or texted once during 19 days in hospital, me twice in 72 hours when there was money involved. He left a voicemail the first time saying he thought there'd been some misunderstanding. The second time he said that Noelle was really upset, and that the house was important to them, and he just wanted to talk it through. He said it in the reasonable voice that people use when they think the problem is that you haven't understood the situation clearly enough, as if more information about the house in Oakville would resolve the prior 19 days in Hamilton. I did not call him back. It was my cousin Deirdre who told me the rest of it. And I want to be clear that Deirdre did not tell me out of malice. She told me because she is one of those people who believes everyone deserves to know the relevant facts of their own life. And I have always loved her for it. We had coffee at her place in Stoney Creek on a Saturday. The kind of Saturday that feels like an apology from the Ontario winter. Gray and cold but still. Deirdre had visited me in the hospital twice. She'd brought soup in a thermos the first time and a novel and a puzzle book the second time, because she'd asked what I needed rather than assuming. During that coffee, she said something that made me set down my mug. She said, I wasn't sure whether to tell you this, but you should know. Vera mentioned it to me. She paused. Apparently, Noelle told the family group chat that you had specifically asked not to have visitors, that you were very private about your health, and it would stress you out to see people. I looked at Deirdre, she continued. She said it right at the beginning, just a few days in. She said you'd been very clear about it and everyone should respect your wishes. So a lot of people who might have reached out simply didn't, because they thought that was what you wanted. I sat with that for a moment. The way you sit with something that has changed the shape of what you thought you understood. I had never said that. I had never said anything even close to that. In the first days in the cardiac care unit, when I still had enough strength to text, I had told Noelle twice that I was scared and lonely, and that having someone there would help. I had those texts still in my phone. I had not told anyone I wanted privacy. I had told my daughter I was afraid. What Noelle had done, and I have had months now to think about this carefully, and I still come back to the same conclusion, was take my fear and reclassify it. She had told the family I wanted solitude so that her own absence would look like respect rather than negligence, so that no one would ask uncomfortable questions about where she'd been or why she hadn't come. She had made my 19 days of loneliness look like a preference. I sat in Deirdre's kitchen for a long time after she told me that. I drove home very carefully, the way you drive when you don't entirely trust your own focus. I'm not a person who makes rash decisions. I'm a nurse. I've spent 30 years in environments where you think before you act, where the difference between a measured response and a reactive one can matter enormously. So I did not do anything for 4 days. I thought about it for 4 days. What I decided was that the truth deserved to exist outside my own head. Not for revenge. Not to humiliate Noelle, though I won't pretend some part of me didn't feel the pull of that, but because I had watched for 19 days what it looks like when people don't have accurate information, and I wasn't willing to be managed that way anymore. My family had a group chat on WhatsApp. I had been on it years ago, before a disagreement about Christmas plans led to me being quietly removed. I asked Deirdre to add me back temporarily. She hesitated, then did it. I posted one thing. I didn't write a speech. I took a photo of my hospital discharge summary, which showed my admission date, my discharge date, my diagnosis, and the dates of both procedures. I posted the photo and I wrote 4 sentences beneath it. For anyone who was told I had asked not to have visitors, that was not true. I was in hospital for 19 days. I had 2 cardiac procedures.
I asked for help and company.
I didn't receive either. Then I left the group chat. I am not going to tell you the fallout was satisfying, exactly, because satisfaction implies something cleaner than what I actually felt. What I felt was tired and sad, and also, underneath that, very quiet. The way a room feels after a window has been opened and the air has finally moved. Deirdre told me what happened over the following week. Several relatives who hadn't known how serious it was sent me messages directly. My Aunt Beatrice, a few cousins, an old family friend who'd known my mother. Vera called and cried a little, which made me cry too, though we both tried not to. There were questions asked in the family group chat that Noelle apparently answered vaguely and then stopped answering at all. Miles, I was told, had nothing to say, which struck me as consistent. As for the house in Oakville, I heard through Deirdre that the deal fell through. Whether that was related to the down payment gap or something else entirely, I genuinely don't know, and I've made my peace with not knowing. It isn't my business anymore. What is my business, and what I have built, slowly, over the months since February, is a different kind of life. Deirdre is in it. Vera, who drove down from Barrie with her bad hip the week after I posted that message, just to have dinner and not talk about any of it unless I wanted to, is in it. Gus, my physiotherapist, referred me to a cardiac rehabilitation program through the hospital, and I've been going on Wednesday mornings, and I've met a woman there named Claire who had her own heart scare last spring and laughs the same way I laugh and makes very strong opinions about Tim Hortons seasonal cups. Claire is in it. I have a small container garden on my back porch now. I replanted the pothos. It came back, they almost always do, if you give them enough light and stop pretending they don't need water. I haven't spoken to Noelle since the phone call where I explained what the transfer meant. I haven't spoken to Miles. I don't have a plan for whether that changes. What I have is the understanding, settled and certain now in a way that no longer surprises me. That love is not a word. It's a Tuesday afternoon with a thermos of soup. It's a physiotherapist learning how you take your tea. It's a cousin with a bad hip who drives 90 minutes in February. Because she thought you should know the truth about your own life. 19 days taught me something that 3 decades of caregiving somehow hadn't. You cannot pour from an empty chair. And an empty chair doesn't become full just because someone says they care about you. Showing up is the proof. The chair is either occupied or it isn't. Mine was empty. I know that now, and I know it completely. And there is a strange and unexpected peace in finally knowing the full shape of a thing. I think about this sometimes. Late in the evening when the house is quiet and I can hear the neighborhood settling around me. The particular creak of an Ontario winter. The distant sound of a plow on the street. I think about the woman in the bed next to mine with her husband and his Tim Hortons travel mug. And her children rotating through on weekends. And I don't feel grief about it anymore. Or at least not the same grief. I feel grateful that I was paying attention. That I saw it clearly. That I knew what I was looking at. So here is what I want to ask you. Because it's the question I've turned over more than any other these past months. If the people who are supposed to know you best are capable of 19 days of silence, and then capable of turning days of silence into something that looks like your preference, does the $220 still feel like too much? Or does it feel, as it does to me, like the only honest thing I've sent them in years? If you have ever found yourself keeping evidence of your own life just to prove it happened, you already know exactly where this story lives. This has been Nova Payback. A new story every single day.